Okay, well, we now move from the new creation. Focus becomes a little more narrow. New Jerusalem, dealing with the outside of the city. Then, I don't know if we'll have time, then we'll look at the inside of the city, and what I'm certain we'll not get to today is the epicenter of the city, downtown. Chapter 22, 1-5. I know we won't get there. Well, my daughter's going to be married here in about 6 weeks, 8 weeks. I don't know, June 1st. And so I'm wrestling with the reality of I'm going to walk her down and I'm also going to perform the ceremony, wrestling also with the fact that she says, "Daddy, please don't cry." Huh? But the most stunning thing that I will say at that wedding is that the uncommon union of a man and a woman is designed to serve, to image the eternal union that exists between God and His people. A union that will finally and ultimately exclude everyone else, like marriage excludes everyone else. I find it interesting that churches often like to refer to themselves as families. There's nothing more exclusive than a family. I think you have to be careful how you use that language. Of course, where it's developed most openly is in Ephesians chapter 5, husbands and wives, Christ and the church. And as you know, Paul says this is a great mysterion, a great mystery. But I'm talking about Christ and the church. Now, by mysterion, Paul is not referring to something mysterious. That's not what that word means. A mysterion, a mystery, is something that's been there all along in the patterns of the Old Testament, but hidden in the shadows so as not to be fully perceived. With the coming of Jesus Christ, however, all such mysteries are unveiled in full disclosure. So that now when two people enter into Christian marriage, they are meant to exemplify something much greater than themselves. The relationship between Christ and the church. In fact, the deepest degree of climactic intimacy human beings can know, sexual intimacy in a good marriage, is the very symbolism that God dares to use to help us understand something of the intimacy we will experience with Him in the new creation. It's the very imagery implied by Paul, for those of you interested in pastoral ministry. It's what he says in 2 Corinthians, I want to present you to Christ as a pure virgin, a chaste virgin. It's the reason why compromises with idolatry are frequently referred to as adultery in the prophetic literature. You've gone whoring after other gods. It's why in the vision of Revelation chapter 14, authentic Christians are referred to as those who have kept their virginity. He's not talking about physical virginity. He's talking about Christians who remain chaste in their allegiance to Jesus Christ. The Church of Jesus is nothing less than His betrothed bride. And the point is this: a day of consummation is coming. The marriage supper of the Lamb, the ultimate expression of intimacy in this most uncommon union. And on that day, precisely because of what Jesus has done for the church will stand alongside Him as a bride unsullied and beautiful. Now that's the scene that we begin to take note of in chapter 21. And the reason why this should be important to you and the people to whom you speak is because you are looking at a mirror when you look at these verses. You're looking into a mirror. If you belong to the Church of Jesus Christ, you are seeing here a reflection of yourself, what you will one day be. Here in this passage, you are not merely the spectator, you are the spectacle. The new creation as it expresses itself in the people who enjoy an uncommon union with God for all of eternity. Marva Dawn says, it's the description of a poet gone crazy with delight. It's the recapitulation now of the theme that was first introduced in verse 2. Remember? I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. But this wasn't the initial thing John was given to see in this vision. Look at verse 1. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. Before he ever mentions seeing this city, he says, I saw a new heaven and a new earth. So for discussion's sake, guys, skip over verse 2. What then does John do in verses 3 through 8? He returns to illustrate the glorious features that will define what he saw in the first vision, the new heaven, the new earth. You say, well, Art, what about that city that he dropped as a little tease in verse 2? That now, beginning in verse 9, through the end of this chapter and spilling over into chapter 22 is what becomes his burden to explain. So, let's change our question just a little bit. What defines the newness of the New Jerusalem? 3 features. Maybe we'll look at one, take a break, and come back to the last 2, and I'll send you home. Here's the first. What defines the newness of the New Jerusalem? The full complement of God's people. The full complement. That's not compli with an I, meant like you're really a handsome person, right? Complement with an E. C-O-M-P-L-E. The full company, the full complement of God's people. Look at verse 9. Then came one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls full of the 7 last plagues and spoke to me, saying, Come, I will show you the bride, the wife of the Lamb. And he carried me away in the Spirit to a great high mountain and showed me the holy city, Jerusalem. Now, physically speaking, brothers, the Apostle John is still on the island of Patmos in the Aegean Sea. But in a state of prophetic inspiration, and all I can do is attempt to define what he means by this. I can't explain it. I've never had this kind of experience. In a state of prophetic inspiration, that is in the realm of the Spirit and by the means of the Spirit, that's all I can say, he is taken to a great and high mountain to witness the next scene in this vision, in particular, the holy city. But again, what is the city? How are we to identify it? Let me ask you a second question. What's the point of mentioning this angel who held one of the 7 bowls of judgment? John's hoping that it triggers something in your mind. The last time he used this phrase, chapter 17, verse 1, then one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and said to me, Come, I will show you the judgment of the great prostitute who is seated on many waters. Here now in chapter 21, verse 9, John uses the same language. In fact, again, I wish I had time to show you all the very tight parallels between the New Jerusalem and Babylon. I have a sheet with these listed. If you would like it, I could send it to you. But why does John do that? He wants to set these 2 cities against each other, both of which I would remind you are referred to as women. Babylon, the harlot. New Jerusalem, the bride. So someone has rightly given Revelation the title, A Tale of 2 Cities, with the subtitle, The Harlot and the Bride. Now I draw this to your attention because recognizing it will help you with the identification of this city. Its counterpart in chapter 17, Babylon. The personification of human culture in antagonism to God. The community of the entire human race as it exists in its socio-economic religious idolatry likened to a prostitute. Her sacred counterpart, the holy city, New Jerusalem. Not a literal city, rather the personification of a community of human beings radically faithful to God, referred to as a bride, referred to as the wife of the Lamb. Now, why refer to her as a city? For the same reason that fallen humanity is referred to as a city, it makes clear that what is in view is a community of human beings. And by the way, in the world of the ancient Middle East, a city was regarded as the ultimate expression of community. Why refer to the church as a bride? To stress the fact that she appears at the pinnacle of her beauty. Why refer to the church as a wife? To convey the unique intimacy that she shares with the Lamb. Again, brothers, do your biblical theology. It is one of the great longitudinal themes that is tacked down onto the storyline of the Bible, running from one end to the other. God is the great husband of the people who constitute His bride. It's a metaphorical way of referring to God's relationship with His people that begins in the Old Testament and comes into full bloom with the imagery of Jesus in the church. And here now it's teased out to its consummate expression. Okay? It is the church triumphant. The new heaven and the new earth, it's a place for a people. The new Jerusalem, a people for a place. The new heaven and the new earth, the home that God has prepared for His bride, the new Jerusalem, the bride that God has prepared for her home. It is the church triumphant. All the people of God from all of the ages of redemptive history, seen here in the fulfillment of what was promised in Ephesians chapter 5, without spot, without blemish, without wrinkle. Now, having identified the New Jerusalem, in verses 10 to 14, the Greek text comprised one compound sentence made up of 5 phrases that describe this city. Notice the first, verse 10. And He carried me away in the Spirit to a great high mountain and showed me the holy city, Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God. Now we consider that very phrase up in verse 2, right? That she is descending out of heaven speaks of the origin of this perfected church. That she is descending from heaven speaks of the originator of this perfected church. What's the point? Very simple. This perfected church in all of her eschatological beauty is not the achievement of human beings but of God. Notice the second descriptive phrase. Having the glory of God, its radiance like a most rare jewel, like a jasper, clear as crystal. Now, brothers, had we started in Revelation 1:1 and worked all of our way through, what would be triggered in your mind is the reality that this is not the first time we've come across such a description. Back in chapter 4, when John is invited into heaven's throne room and he sees the radiance of this God who dwells in unapproachable light, he likens it to the shimmering brilliance of a costly jasper. Now that same dazzling radiance is seen to be emanating from the church. Why? Because the church is now arrayed with God's glory. His glory that signifies the immediacy of His presence. In fact, brothers, I would urge you to strongly consider the fact that these 2 final chapters in the Revelation are the final fulfillment of the great prophecy that occurs in the last 8 chapters of Ezekiel. The prophecy of a final temple in which God Himself will forever place His glory. You read it. You read it. The language there, the imagery there, ripples through all of chapter 21 and 22. Nearly line after line after line after line, drawn right back into Ezekiel 40 to 48. And by the way, you know how Ezekiel ends the whole book? One final phrase. Anybody know? The Lord, Yahweh, is there. And that's what this is. The Lord is here. His very presence is manifested by the radiance of His unshielded glory. His unshielded glory, which tells us something very important. The indescribable beauty that we will possess on that day will not be an inherent one that earns us the right to be the bride of Christ. God himself will make us into the dazzling jewel John here describes by granting his own glory to us. Look at the third descriptive phrase. It had a great high wall with 12 gates. Now, guys, let me ask you, how do we distinguish today's great cities one from another? One way you can do it is by the line of skyscrapers. So you can identify places like Seattle. In fact, remember the Frasier TV show? The little skyline of Seattle, right? You can show me a skyline of San Diego, San Francisco, New York, Chicago, and I can identify each of those pictures by virtue of the skyline. In the ancient world, the wall that surrounded a great city is what gave it its distinct quality, its distinct identity. But a wall did even more than that. It served as a sign of security. But I would remind you, this is not a literal city, nor is this a literal wall. Rather, the symbol of this great high wall is to suggest that the church will always remain secure in its position of communion with God. One of the great benefits of eternal life will be the feeling of absolute security. The fourth descriptive phrase, and at the gates 12 angels, and on the gates the names of the 12 tribes of the sons of Israel were inscribed. On the east 3 gates, on the north 3 gates, on the south 3 gates, and on the west 3 gates. Why are there angels stationed at each of these gates? It ought to remind you of something as you do your biblical theology. It ought to remind you of the cherubim guarding entrance into the Garden of Eden, ensuring that no unworthy person would eat from the tree of life. Cast your eye over to verse 27. But nothing unclean will ever enter it, nor anyone who does what is detestable or false. And why 12 gates? 3 on each side of this 4-cornered city. Many, many Roman cities had 3 gates providing entrance on one side. It was kind of typical. This city provides access on all sides, implying that it welcomes people from all directions. How does Jesus say it, guys? They will come from the east and the west and the north and the south, and recline at the table in the kingdom of God. Luke 13:29. Who? All those written in the Lamb's Book of Life, verse 27 tells us. But why 12 gates? Why 12 gates? And in keeping with that, look at the 5th descriptive phrase. And the wall of the city had 12 foundations, and on them were the 12 names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. Now, guys, get the imagery in your mind's eye. 3 gates on each side of this 4-cornered wall meant the entire circuit of the wall was divided into 12 great sections. Each of these 12 sections was then supported by a massive foundation stone. But did you notice here the repeated mention of these 12s? 12, 12, 12, 12, 12. The number 12 and its multiples permeate this entire section. Not only here, elsewhere in the book of Revelation, but notice 12 gates, 12 angels, 12 tribes, 12 foundations, 12 apostles, 12,000 stadia, 144 cubits, 12 pearls. I assure you, friends, John's burden here is not mathematical, or as we will soon see, architectural. It's symbolical. Very much like the number 7, pardon the pun, in apocalyptic. Read it for yourself. Numbers, pardon the pun, count. It's no accident that we see 7 churches. There are a lot more churches than that in Asia Minor. 7 churches, 7 golden lampstands, 7 stars, 7 flaming torches, 7 spirits of God, 7 eyes, 7 seals, 7 angels, 7 trumpets, 7 heads, 7 plagues, 7 bowls, 7 mountains, 7 kings, 7 pronouncements of blessing, 7 beatitudes in the book of Revelation. And beyond all of that, there are all kinds of grammatical phrases in the book of Revelation that repeat themselves 7 times. Some people just don't think the Apostle John was that smart. 7, stressing fullness and completeness like 7 days in a week. You also have 10s and their multiples. And 12s are everywhere. 12 and its multiple used as symbols to speak of the people of God. And here in these particular descriptions of this city, the names of the 12 tribes of Israel inscribed on the gates, the names of the 12 apostles inscribed on the foundation stones. What I'm trying to tell you, friends, is that this city, don't forget, this city is a metaphorical expression of the people of God. This city is nothing less than the full complement of the people of God. The full and complete expression of the people of God. People like Noah and Abraham and Moses and Elijah and David, and people like Mary and Paul and Peter and John and you. So that the transition, guys, from Old Covenant Judaism to New Covenant Christianity is not an ending and a new start, or worse yet, Old Line dispensationalism. The church is a parenthesis. The bride of Christ is a parenthesis in God's real plan that has to do with Israel. It is rather a linear continuation and development of a unified redemptive history, which means that everyone who has ever belonged to the God who has revealed himself most fully in Jesus Christ will be there. Baptist will be there. Yeah, you stole my thunder, John. Pentecostals will be there. Roman Catholics will be there. You say, Roman Catholics? I didn't say all Roman Catholics, just like I would never say all Baptists, or all Presbyterians, or all Reformed people, or all dispensationalists. All of the people who have truly belonged to the God who has ultimately revealed himself most fully in Jesus Christ will be there. It is the work of God, beautified by the presence of God, secured by the protection of God, distinguished by abundant access to God, populated by the full complement of the people of God. Now, what we recognize at this point is a city of absurd, ridiculous proportions if you understand this literally. Notice verse 15. And the one who spoke with me had a measuring rod of gold to measure the city and its gates and walls. The city lies 4 squared, literally 4 cornered. Its length the same as its width. And he measured the city with its rod, 12,000 stadia. Its length and width and height are equal. Now, guys, some of you may have an English translation that converts this into its American equivalent, so that it may say something like 1,500 miles or 1,400 miles. I think the New American Standard does this. The problem with this is that while it makes the size of the city more understandable to us, it loses its emphasis on the multiple of 12, and thus we forget to think of this number in a symbolic way. In fact, with all due respect, knowing the people who translated the book of Revelation for the New American Standard, it comes from a person who believes that understanding literary genre is a step on the road to liberalism. Totally misses the point. Notice yet another clue. Its length and width and height are equal. So that this city is not just a square. It's a cube, a geometric form in the ancient world that was considered to be the standard of perfection. See Bruce Metzger's book, Breaking the Code. So are we to be thinking here of a literal city? 1,400 miles long, 1,400 miles wide, 1,400 miles high. I would remind you guys it's very difficult to breathe at the top of Mount Everest, the tallest point on our planet, not quite 6 miles above sea level. This city, if assumed to be literal, is 1,400 miles high. May I suggest something else to you? Something much more in keeping with the genre of the Revelation. Do your biblical theology. Where in the entire Bible do you find the only other mention of a geometric cube? Only one other in all of the Bible. Only one other in the entire Bible. The Holy of Holies. 1 Kings chapter 6, verse 20. The only other time we read of a cube. The location where God placed the greatest and most immediate manifestation of His presence. And by the way, just as a brief side note, a cube has 12 sides, doesn't it? 6 inside, 6 outside, and here we're told that each side is 12,000 stadia. What's 12 times 12,000? 144,000, the number already used in the book of Revelation in chapter 7 and 14 to speak of the entirety of the people of God. The purpose of measuring this city is to display the fullness of God's presence that will forever be with the totality of His people. Notice what John adds, verse 17. He also measured its wall 144 cubits by human measurement, which is also an angel's measurement. Now, guys, if we want to take this literally, boy, there are people always interpret the Bible literally. Okay. By the way, you understand the concept of sensus literalis, which came at us from the Revelation? You will hear people who will take that concept that Luther championed and say it means interpret the Bible literally. Sensus literalis does not mean you interpret the Bible literally. It means that you interpret the Bible literarily. It means that interpreting it right means you respect the literary genre. Everything needs to be taken in its most literal sense. If you take this literally, you've got a problem. 144 cubits translated into an American equivalent means about 216 feet. But what is this angel measuring? Look at it. Is he measuring the height of this wall? That'd be very, very strange. You think about it. A city 1,400 miles high, surrounded by a protective wall that extends up from the ground about 72 yards. I mean, it kind of blows out the notion of verse 12. It had a great high wall, not hardly. It would be hopelessly disproportionate. Maybe he's measuring the thickness of this wall. But that just changes disproportion into bad architecture. 72 yards is only a fraction of the width needed for a wall 1,400 miles high. What is this 144 cubits? 12 times 12. Yet another measurement that reinforces the emphasis that this city in which God places His presence is a figurative expression for His people. Do the work of appreciating literary genre before you ever come at the book of Revelation. Okay? Find out how numbers are used in this style of writing. Okay? The New Jerusalem is not a place for a people, it is a people for a place. That place is the new heaven and the new earth, and the point is, wherever we go in the new heaven and the new earth, it will be the Holy of Holies, because God's immediate presence will be there in the very midst of His people.